Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Our culture views retirement strictly through a financial lens, ignoring elements that result in a fulfilling life after work. The retirement dream that society convinces us to accept is the wrong dream. Countless retirees become disappointed as the sun sets, realizing that focusing on themselves and a comfortable lifestyle feels curiously empty. Our next guest book explores the tangible, unquantifiable sides of the retirement equation. Preparing for this tectonic shift in your life requires serious reflection, intentional thinking, and implementing critical steps in order to thrive in what should be the most impactful, purposeful season of your life. Joel Malick, a partner with Steadfast Wealth Co in Colorado Springs, Colorado, joined the financial services industry in 2001. He graduated with a degree in finance from Seattle Pacific University, where he played collegiate soccer. Joining us now to talk about a book co-authored with Alex Lippert entitled Afterwork, an honest discussion about the retirement lie and how to live a future worthy of dreams, is Joel Malick. Joel, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Joel, this is something that, a topic not much talked about. We hear the Dave Ramseys of the world talking about building financial wealth and security so that you can live out those retirement years. And he has a component in there of service. But his component of service is integrated into the overall paradigm of daily life, not just retirement years. So he doesn't really break it out that says that you work to retire so then you can then devote yourself to service. So as great a plan as he has, which it's a phenomenal plan, I have my daughter working that plan at 31 as a mom, trying to get herself financially budgeting and doing things that I've tried to teach her along the way, but as life happens, it's not happening, and so I've put her through financial peace so that she could see in her own eyes the benefits of it. But at 31, she's not thinking about retirement. Right? At almost 70, I'm also not thinking about retirement. I look at Pat Robertson, who at 93 is still on TV every day. Maybe he's a little long in the tooth, but nevertheless, he's still trying to live a vital, vibrant ministry life. And I think that this idea of retirement, I don't find it in the Bible.
No, I think the first thing we could probably do is unpack the word retire a little bit, because I think we have this idea that retirement's going to be this amazing thing that we're striving for. And maybe not everyone's wired that way, but I would say by and large, most people are looking forward to this thing they think is going to be retirement. But the word actually means to recede or withdraw or to put out of use. Right. So I think it's maybe the best word we have right now to describe, when you say to someone, hey, I'm going to retire, they sort of know what it means. It'd be nice if we had a different word for it. But I don't think any of us, if we really look in the mirror, are thinking, yeah, I can't wait to begin to recede. I think we all know that we're created to really lean in, and we all have a calling on our life. But retirement is a funny transition. We believe, and we talk about this in the book, but the retirement lie is the idea that a selfish, withdrawn retirement is going to be a fulfilling one. And the problem with that is that we've spent 20, 30, 40 years dreaming about this time when it's going to be all about us. Right? Like, hey, I've put my work in, I've spent all this time really leaning into other people's lives, whether it's at work or my family. I've been pouring myself out. Now it's time for me to receive, for me to get. And I think we know, just even biblically, that's a really bad posture to take. What we found in working with retirees for over 20 years is that that mindset never leads to fulfillment. We think it's going to, but then it doesn't. And Hemingway has a famous quote in his book, The Sun Also Rises, where he asks, "How did you go bankrupt?" And the gentleman says, "Gradually and then suddenly." And I think what that speaks to is we don't really know it's broken as we're sort of working our way to retirement until we actually get there. So we're not preparing along the way. Just like you accumulate assets for retirement, we're not trying to accumulate any mindset about retirement. We just think we're going to show up and it's going to be great, right? Of course, we spend years saving for retirement. And you mentioned Dave Ramsey, and he does a great job. I totally agree with you. I think, and this book is not written to discount the effort it takes to really plan around the financial side, because I think we have to be good stewards, right? But it's also calling out the fact that, well, what's the point of getting into retirement, or whatever we want to call it, Eric, if you don't enjoy it anyways?
Joel, I want to tell you that the Hebrew mind looks at the word retirement or the word retire, and because Hebrew is broken down into word parts, the word is actually to retire, which means I'm going to take my old tires and I'm going to replace them with new tires. I'm going to retire, which means that I'm going to change the paradigm. You wouldn't retire your car with an old, beat up, worn out tire. You would retire it with a new set of tires. And so my mind hears the word retire, and it says, okay, now you're going to put on a new set of tires, and you're going to chart a new course for your life on these new tires. So we're very literal minded because Hebrew is such a very literal language, and the piece parts are so very critical in being able to read and understand the Hebrew text. So when I think of it that way, that I'm going to put a new set of tires on my life, and I'm going to head in a new direction, it kind of creates a framework of a positive change, as opposed to what your statistics and the statistics you compiled is that you wind up watching TV. You don't have planned activities. There's nothing rewarding about this lifestyle. And I think and I qualify in the geriatric medical field. I'm treated by a geriatric doctor only because Medicare forces me to. I don't feel that way, but in that world, you see a great deal of obesity. You find that the divorce rates are extraordinarily higher.
Yep.
And these are things we never hear. I've never heard. When I looked at the statistics that were provided by you, I was shocked at what the impact of retirement actually does, and it's staggering.
Yeah, I think one thing we try to draw out in the book is that we absolutely believe this can be your greatest season yet. We don't see this as a kind of a sun setting on your time. People will ask, if you go to a party, Eric, they'll say, "Hey, what did you used to do?" And my guess is, Eric, for a gentleman like you who is still living out his calling every day, you're not a "what did you used to do?" You're a "what are you doing?" And what we're trying to help retirees understand is that, man, you've got more wisdom, you've got more resources financially, you've got more time on your hands than you've ever had before. I mean, does that sound like the best time to begin to withdraw? The funny thing is we just use the term flip the script. The script we've been sold actually leads us to things like depression, anxiety, loneliness, this idea that, hey, go just chase the world, right? Like go on a ton of trips, make it all about you. And what you end up finding out, which I think we all realize, is that you can't take a trip long enough. You can't sit on the beach long enough. You're never going to find fulfillment in those places. Now, some people say, well, gosh, Joel, like is retirement supposed to be, I'm not supposed to have any fun here? And what we tell people is absolutely not. This is meant to be a different season. And that's why I love when you said the retire. You're kind of putting on a new set of tires. It's as if we had talked before this, but that's exactly right. It's meant to be enjoyed in a new and different way, but it's not meant to just be all about you. And I think we start to get into the discussion about happiness and meaningfulness in the book. And I would say the general world's definition of retirement is to sort of chase this happiness, right? But it's not getting down to kind of the root of why we were created, which is where we really all find fulfillment. And so the things we've laid out in the book, some of the keys, they're really designed to get you past happiness and into meaningfulness.
There was a time when there was an organization called SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives, and it was pretty active maybe 25 or 30 years ago. I don't know if it is now. And what it did was he took retired executives and got them plugged into incubators and acting as mentors for people who would take advantage of their wisdom. They would counsel them, help them put together business plans, do things like that. There are, I have a guest coming on after you that talks about microfinance, being able to put small dollars to help young people get started in a business venture. I have a nephew who started out with an idea called athlete tracks, and it kept every high school student's statistics so that all coaches could look, and as they began to recruit, they could go to one central database. And so he and his college roommate developed this. They wound up selling it. And then they created a payment system, and they used the wisdom of retired bankers and retired retailers to say, listen, payment problems. There's lots of payment services, PayPal, but what are these other services not doing for you? And so they created a offering called Pineapple Payments, and just sold it. Again, so second company, before he's 32 years old, he's sold his second software company. And in both cases, they use mentors from the retired wisdom of people that they reached out to that used to be in the business and said, hey, what is it that you can teach us and show us and tell us from, instead of us going out and paying for surveys, is to use your collective wisdom. And I think mentorship is something that the church needs to totally employ and totally embrace, even past missions, that you have young couples that you have in your congregations. You have newlyweds and you have 50-year-old married couples, and that 50-year-old married couple is retired, but how did you make it 50 years, and what are the pitfalls? Right. And imagine them adopting a young couple and mentoring them and pouring into their life, their experiences, and the man having once a month lunch with the new husband, right, and the wife of 50 years, and saying, hey honey, listen, he's not going to change. You can't change him. You can change yourself, but you can't change him. So these expectations of all your happiness is being tied up in him. You need to get past that, because over 50 years, you got to have your own identity.
Right.
So there's so much, and Solomon says that this white hair is a crown of wisdom.
Yeah.
But yet it's wasted.
Yeah, and I think it's mainly that way because we don't see ourselves that way in retirement. We still look at it as though I've sort of had my big season on the stage of life. In Okinawa, there was this gentleman that we reference in the book that did some research about these areas called blue zones, where people live to be much older. And in Okinawa, they don't have a word for retirement. They have a word that's like non-perfect, and you have all these things that you thought were on your to-do list that tend to sort of fade into the background after 6 months or 12 months, whatever we call it the retirement sugar rush period, where you arrive in retirement and it actually is sort of living up to the expectation initially. And that's because, man, the first time, when you go on a vacation, Eric, that vacation's enjoyable. And it's meant to be a break from kind of the monotony of your labor, which is a good labor, but it's still nice to get a break, right? Well, we ask people, what do you do when your whole life's a vacation? And when you get through the honey-do list that you've been building up, and now the lawn's perfect, and the first winter rolls in. Well, I'll tell you what most retirees do is they just go back and find a regular job. And so I hear this a lot of times in my office to say, it's not living up to what I expected. So our expectation was something much greater than what we're getting, because I didn't approach it the right way. I didn't think about retirement the way maybe Eric is living out his retirement, or many others who are doing a great job really leaning into their calling. And so they end up going back to a regular job. I have interesting thoughts on this just because I feel like this is kind of the ultimate failure, right? It's a acknowledgement that you just haven't thought enough about it. You don't really know what to do. And so the easy button is to just go back to what you always did. And usually, not that would be necessarily a bad thing, because some people need some financial help in retirement, and that's good, but maybe we can find a role that more aligns with who you feel you're called to be in this next season, as opposed to just getting a job. And so when people say, hey, I'm going back to work, we know that it's not working. Retirement for them, they're not feeling purposeful. And I hear all the time, like, I just don't feel as useful anymore. And to me, that's really a symptom of kind of the bigger problem that, these individuals are not putting their skills to work to benefit others, which is really where we find fulfillment. Kind of the root of fulfillment and purpose really is not about what you're getting. Robert Louis Stevenson, a famous poet who wrote Treasure Island, he said, don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds that you plant. And to me, that's kind of the quintessential difference between this happiness idea and this meaningfulness idea. Happiness is looking to win something, and meaningfulness is looking to change something. And so we want to get people thinking in the range of, man, what am I really good at? What do I love to do? And to your point, Eric, it could be mentorship. It could be serving at an organization. It could be, we have one story in the book about a gentleman who just loved math. And so he worked with some inner city kids to help improve their math scores. And man, he found himself just loving life. They were looking up to him as a mentor now, not just a teacher, and he was having all kinds of adjacent conversations with these kids about who are you going to be? What are you doing to make yourself better? And it was a great quote at the end. He just said, when I look in the mirror, I really like what I see, and I think it's just a great way to think about as you have people listening to the show or watching the show, if they're asking, well, what can I do? Well, certainly I have a book that will help lay that out, but I think the best place to start is to think about what gets me up in the morning. If I could define what that could be day in and day out, like maybe it's not always perfect, but what gets me excited? How can I help others with that?
It's interesting. My mother's 95. She has volunteered 3 days a week for the last 40 years. She was honored by Make-A-Wish. They have a whole wall which is dedicated to her. The Civic Theater, she does their books, she does accounting and things like that. She's 95. And during COVID, her greatest problem and regret was that she couldn't volunteer. Now, she raised us with, and many in the Jewish community are raised to be service oriented. So myself, my two sisters were required. We were given a list of things we could volunteer to do. One of them was being a candy striper at the hospital, and so that's what I did. And so you go get an older person, put them in a wheelchair, and you take them from here to there, or you just do whatever you're told. But we were required at the age of 13 to get involved in volunteering. And that created a service kind of heart to, it's almost like tithing. It's you get to keep 90%, but you give 10%, right. And so it's a different view, different perspective. As people look at this, and I can see that there is a real connection between understanding what your spiritual gifts are and what retirement would look like if you applied your spiritual gifts. So, we look at that kind of in a church setting and say, okay, well, we'll do a spiritual gift inventory, and if you have a gift of administration, well, we'll put you in counting the offering and helping with supplies and things like that. If you have the gift of hospitality, we'll put you out front to greet. But in your personal life, I don't think we look at our spiritual gifting and apply it to what am I gifted at? If I'm a gifted teacher, well, then I should be looking at opportunities even in retirement years to continue to apply that spiritual gift, because when I'm operating that spiritual gift, I find joy.
Yeah.
And it seems to be there's a connection there that maybe we've missed, and we think that spiritual gifts have to do with church and not with the individual. These are your gifts, and if you know what they are, it gives you opportunity to how to apply them. And if you're operating in your gifts, you're going to feel rewarded. You'll find joy in that.
That's exactly right. I love that story about your mom, because it brings up a good point, which is a lot of retirees think that the first 10 to 15 years are really those are sort of their main last years. They look at 85 to 95 as, I'm going to be battling health issues, I'm not going to be able to do anything, and therefore I'm not going to be happy. And so they really try to jam pack those first decade or 15 years. And what we try to help people see is your purpose and who you're created to be is not a function of what you do day in and day out necessarily, right? Like, I'm willing to bet that your mom did things a little differently when she was 65 to 75 than maybe she does when she's 95, but who your mom is still manifests itself on a daily basis. And so what we tell people is, that's true, you might not be on as many airplanes when you're 95, but who in your sphere around you can you influence with the same calling you had when you were 70? And the funny thing is like, that's really where fulfillment comes from. Like, you just mentioned your mom, like her biggest issue during the time of COVID was that she couldn't go volunteer. What an unselfish thing to say, because she's experienced it and lived it. And she understands that it's the person who's volunteering that's actually getting the reward. It's the person who's tithing that's actually getting the reward. My church doesn't necessarily need my 10%. God doesn't need the 10% that he asks us to tithe. He's God, right? He could do whatever he wants to do, but he wants our trust and our obedience. And I always joke, I'm like, what a great business partner God is. And I don't look at it as giving 10%. It's like, hey, you can keep 90. It's like, wow, great deal. And so I love that picture that you just drew for us with your mom, because life's not over at 80. Life's not over at 85. It's not over at 90. You are still called. And my grandpa was just a great man. passed away just a few years ago, lived in a retirement community for a fair amount of his kind of last decade of life. And, you can kind of progress from very low assistance to maybe higher assistance. And he went through that overall progression, but he was always sort of living out his calling, whether it was with friends, over a meal, playing games. He's always sharing the word, and he was always feeling purposeful.
I think that's what defines value. People are looking to and ask themselves the question, what's my legacy? What have I left behind? Will I be missed if I'm gone? Have I made enough impact that there would be anybody that would be bothered by my passing? Would anybody notice? I live by myself and have for a long time. And I'm one of those people that plays the part of an extrovert, but and do it well, as a TV talk show host, as a radio host, as an author, as a teacher. But I can go a week and be at home and be productive writing and researching and doing things and not have a human interaction and not be incredibly bothered by it, don't even notice it, and I'm perfectly comfortable in that. But in teaching and ministering and pouring out to others, that's my calling, is to teach and to preach and to administer. So managing a ministry and then being active in it. And that doesn't have an expiration date. I looked on the bottom of my feet for the barcode, and there's just not one there. So as long as I have a sound mind and have no evidence of not having one, I plan to go on until I just can't go on. And it's I don't see retirement as something that's a goal in my life, is to stop. In the church, we don't have the venerable rabbis like we do in the synagogue. And if you take a look at people gathering around a 93-year-old man with a long white beard and hanging on every word he says, we don't really have that in the believing community. The pastor retires and he goes off and he does whatever he does, but in Judaism and in Jewish believers, we do it the same way in the believing community, is that we build homes for the aged. We build community centers for the seniors. We build a central place of life for daily gathering, so that there are activities planned, there's connections made, and people aren't left behind, and it becomes very inclusive. And this has been our model because we've had to live in ghettos, always been herded together for thousands of years. As we've had this sense of community, it's because we had to. We had no choice. First of all, we weren't welcome in most places, and second of all, it was for our own protection. That the more we could gather the herd close together, the harder it is to attack. To attack it. And so we invested in building the community. We have so many denominations of Christianity, and we have so many different programs and things like that we really don't focus on the elders. And so I think that the church plays a part in this paradigm in preparing and identifying as people are aging, is finding useful ways for them to serve and engage them, reach out to them and say, okay, now that you have time, you were a plumber, you were a carpenter, you were an electrician, you were a businessman, you were this. Can we get you involved and one day a week of volunteering, and engage once this COVID thing goes away and we're back to normal, and we're rapidly getting to that point that there's things that have gone with disrepair for 13 months. You need somebody to come in and help you restore something that sits idle for 13. A building ages. A building actually begins to die with lack of use. And so as you look at real estate investments, if there's been an unoccupied property for 5 years, whatever their asking price is, I reduce it by 40% because of death. There are things that died in that 5-year period. So it's worth 40% less to me because you're going to have to go back and repair or replace that which decays for lack of use.
That's right.
We're talking with Joel Malick, co-author along with Alex Lippert of a new book called Afterwork, an honest discussion about the retirement lie and how to live a future worthy of dreams. As we look at an aging population and the increase in the numbers of those over 65, which was that baby boomer generation, that post-World War II, and the Jewish community, the first Holocaust survivor generation, the first post-Holocaust generation of Americans who were embracing this American dream and this American lifestyle. And it was different for our parents than it is for us. And as we look at this, we want two things. We want dignity and we want joy. And joy is tied to purpose. Joy is not tied to indulgence.
Right.
And as we look at this retirement paradigm, we have to employ a vision for relevance. It's the same struggle our millennials are having in finding relevance in the church. We, as an older generation, need to find relevance in our life in order to feel fulfilled by serving the dreams of others. Joseph served the dreams of Pharaoh and the cupbearer and the baker long before his dreams came to pass. Daniel served the dreams of Nebuchadnezzar without any attention to his own. And until he served the dreams of another, only then did his dreams become fulfilled. Maybe that's a model for us, is that as we look at the later years, if we can get behind other people's dreams and be the Aarons and the Hurs to lift up their arms, that we will find victory in a period, in a sense of becoming kind of set aside and not in the flow of life, but just observing the flow of life. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue this discussion with Joel Malick about the book Afterwork, an honest discussion about the retirement lie and how to live a future worthy of dreams. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, host of Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Revealing Prophecy, seen every week on the Igniting Nation Broadcasting Network. Our daily on-demand programming is available on our Apple and Android apps and on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Android TV. We broadcast live Monday through Friday through our apps, on our website, ignitingnation.com, and on Facebook Live. You can listen daily on our audio platforms on Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, and iHeart. Our lineup of best-selling authors bring you the most in-depth biblical insights into the most pressing issues of our time, including prophecy, Israel, spiritual warfare, and a wide variety of contemporary Christian issues impacting the body of Messiah around the globe. If you missed the live show, you can always catch up on the Igniting Nation YouTube channel. Follow us on social media and join us as we endeavor to heal the nations with the Word of God.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment, is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to study right by my side through the Biblical Truth Library. Imagine having access to over 1,000 hours of audio and video teachings available to you through our website on a subscription basis or via our Apple and Android apps on an a la carte basis. Whichever method you choose, we promise to deliver new insights into the living Word of God as seen through the eyes of a Jewish believer. If you hunger and thirst like millions around the world for a deeper walk with God and the revelation of new understanding of the Scriptures, visit ignitinganation.com and click on the Biblical Truth Library or on any device with our free app. Don't let another day go by without receiving your heart's desire for a new depth of understanding into all of God's Word. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Joel Malick, who, along with Alex Lippert, have written a book called Afterwork, an honest discussion about the retirement lie and how to live a future worthy of dreams. Joel, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Eric.
You have a chapter in the book on faith, and of course this program is a faith program. We're a Christian broadcasting network, and faith is an important part of this whole identity, and whether or not your identity is going to be in the world, and what the world defines as happiness, and what the world defines as success, and how God defines it, and how faith plays a part in it. Why address the faith component uniquely, individually, as a whole chapter in a book on retirement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing we wanted to be really sensitive to is that we understand that not everyone has faith. And in the audience reading the book, some were going to have different levels of faith than others. Some were going to have no faith at all. The book was not written to browbeat anyone. If you don't have faith, then you're a lesser person. We wanted to really be honoring of everyone. And so we felt like faith deserved its own separate chapter. And so the idea behind how we constructed it is, if someone were reading the book but they didn't have any faith, we would point them towards why faith is so important. Obviously, if you have faith, you have a built-in calling, right? You have a built-in purpose. You don't have to go looking for purpose. You can just live out your faith, right, in retirement. And you know that when you're your existence for eternity. So how you view living in eternity or your life, that affects how you live today. So if you have no faith at all and you think it's sort of over when I'm over, when the lights go out, that's all there is, that changes how you act every day of your life. However, if you believe in God and you believe in the resurrection, then you have an idea that, hey, what I do here matters, absolutely, because I only have one life to live, but it's really driving me into a greater place that I'm headed to. There's more hope in the future even. And that really has a huge impact on how we decide to live each day in this life. And so Erwin McManus, who we reference in the book in the faith chapter, he's got a great book called The Last Arrow, where he really dives into this, and we pulled out just a little section of it. But how we view our existence forever changes how we live today, right? And so faith is a critical step. Now, I'll be honest with you. We hope that a non-believer picks up our book and they feel that we approached it delicately enough, but not void of the truth, in a way that they didn't feel was offensive to them, that they're open to engaging in faith. That if I had to put out there the ultimate goal of the book, if someone gave me feedback and said, hey, I read your book and I went through a process over a period of God called us to write it ultimately. But then there's other reasons in there, the people who already have faith, right? But there's lots of people who have faith that aren't really living out their calling. And so we needed to address faith in a couple different ways. We needed to address the person who doesn't even really believe it's important. Person who they have faith, but they're not really living out their calling, right? So maybe they're not experienced that deep purpose and fulfillment that can come from like what you're doing, Eric, which is living out your calling in and day out. And then we wanted to have enough in there for the person who has a very deep faith, who is living life on mission. And so we felt like the only way really to do that was, I think if you were to read the book from front to back, you would absolutely get a sense of our faith. But it wouldn't be offensive enough to take someone who was not a believer and immediately set the book down.
You bring up something very interesting, and it has to do with the perception of the throne of judgment, that every believer will stand before God and give an account. And for the believer, the account is not about your sin. The account is, what have you done since you received the gift of salvation to advance the kingdom? Now, I can imagine that first of all, in the church, there's lots of misconception about this. People are afraid of standing before the judgment seat because they don't understand that this is the time when you get your reward. This is where you get the jewels in your crown. This is for the believer. This is a great and glorious day, unless you have nothing to report. Unless you say, I got saved at 7 and I did nothing with it, and then you'll be in the kingdom, but you'll be least in the kingdom. You'll probably be scooping lamb poop or something, But the point is that if I live a vibrant believer's life until retirement and then I stop, then I'm not perfecting my testimony. I'm not continuing to overcome. I'm not adding to my story of when I stand before the throne and God says to me, so let me understand this. You are a 45-year-old Jewish guy and you accepted Jesus as your Messiah. You dedicated 25 years of your life to advancing the gospel to the Jew first, and then to the Greek. You did it through building a congregation, a television network, you wrote books, you did interviews, and then you decided at 75 you were done, you were going to retire, and from 75 to 96, which you're standing before the throne at 96, you're telling me that for 21 years you did nothing to advance the kingdom of God? So you squandered, you did great, and you have many jewels in your crown, but when I take a look at the last 20 years, I can't add anything to it because you stopped
Right.
in this calling that when you become a believer, you have two assignments by God. You are a minister of reconciliation and an ambassador for God. These are appointments made in 2 Corinthians 5:17 by Paul that says, this is who you are. Everybody who is a Messiah becomes a minister. You're ordained as a minister, and then you're assigned to the State Department of the Kingdom of Heaven as an ambassador. Now, when we look at some of these ambassadors, we have 85-year-old ambassadors serving in foreign countries, having throwing a dinner and representing the United States in good relations with foreign countries. There's no age limit.
Right.
So we have this artificially inseminated age where our contribution seems to wane, and we have this idea that we're going to stop life as we know it and start a new life that says that I'm not going to do the things I used to do. I'm going to spend my time gardening. Well,
Right.
I have a garden outside, and I have somebody who takes care of it, and they don't come but every 2 weeks for 1 hour.
Right.
And they take care of all the gardening every 2 weeks for 1 hour. So if I were to replace them, well, there's 1 hour every 2 weeks.
Right,
That's
right.
2 hours a month that I'm going to devote to gardening. It's just not. It's not logical. And so, like anything else, we need to be practicing retirement before we retire and hone skills that will take us into retirement. Certainly good financial planning, but a vision for what we're going to continue in, what we're going to pursue that has meaning, and have the wonderful spreadsheet and have the wonderful return on investment and have the wonderful portfolio, but then have a vision for what you're going to do, not what you're going to not do.
Right. Yeah, and we talk to our clients about, just as we're accumulating assets, we need to accumulate these disciplines. And in the book, you know, it's not necessarily rocket science, Eric, but it is very valuable. We use a lot of stories. You know, we've studied a lot of people who have done great at retirement and some who have really struggled, and we've asked ourselves the question, well, kind of give you one example. Being busy doesn't mean you're purposeful. You know, and we always say it's great to maybe spend some time on the garden. You know, it's great to maybe go on the trip. It's great to maybe enjoy getting out and the weather's nice and mowing the lawn. None of those things in of themselves are bad, but they're not who you are, right? And they can't fill 15 hours a day. You know, and so we try to help people see themselves as, what am I going to do? Who am I going to be when I'm not me anymore? You know, we sort of use it as a little bit of a rhetorical question because obviously you're the same person, but just like into what we did, that what we did became who we were. And, you know, we've had a number of people read the book and give us feedback, and some of the most consistent feedback is, I wish I would have read this 20 years ago. You know, because these things have to be practiced. They have to be put into practice and developed. And I loved your example of how you're basically an introvert masquerading as an extrovert on the radio station, because I feel the same way sometimes. Is I could go spend a week by myself, reading and pouring into the word or growing in a certain way, and I could be fulfilled. But what I love about that is your life has texture. I call that texture. It means you have the ebb and the flow that we learn to enjoy while we're working. The seasons where you're pouring yourself in, but then you're getting a break, and then you're pouring yourself in and you're getting a break. And I think retirees need texture a lot. One other thing that we tout in the book that I probably get the biggest pushback on is journaling. People go, oh, well, first of all, that's not for men, and who can, who wants to pour their emotions into a book? And so we go into lots of info as to why journaling is critical and how to do it the right way, not maybe the way you think in your mind. But I'll just give you one takeaway that I think is really important is the best thing about journaling for the retiree is they're able to document along the way the little successes. And then I encourage people once a year to go back and read through their journal and do a little summary at the end. And you will be shocked at the things you are doing in the ways God is using you that throughout the year you would have just kind of forgotten about. And I do this every year in my own life, and I'm not retired. I don't plan on retiring under the traditional sense. But it's amazing what going back and seeing what your progress was for the year will do for your heart, mind, and spirit. Because I will tell you, retirees, they don't feel like they're winning.
Right.
They don't feel like they're making progress. They kind of feel like they're biding time, which is a terrible mindset to live in. So that's just one takeaway I'd like to leave with everyone.
Well, I appreciate that, because so many retirees go meal to meal and television program to television program, and they build their life around the fact, where are we going for lunch and what are we going to watch? And that's not fulfilling. We've been talking with Joel Malick, who along with Alex Lippert have written a very insightful book, very powerful, very clear message, an honest discussion, as it says, about the retirement lie and how to live a future worthy of dreams, entitled Afterwork. This is not just for when you're retired, but as you're doing your financial planning. There's a whole nother dimension to your life which you haven't planned. And I don't know very many who have. And I think that's a void. And maybe some of the statistical problems, which is divorce rates and anxiety, obesity, depression, all these things that come with a non-fulfilling life in retirement, can all be avoided by reading this in advance and creating a life plan. Yep. And tucking that right behind your financial plan and making them a universal plan for retirement that covers both the expenses, the income, and the purpose of where you can serve and find value in retirement. Joel, I thank you for writing this. Thank you for the time, and thoroughly enjoyed it. We could go on for a long time talking about this, because statistically there's a much different impact on men and women based on pure definition as we live our lives, defining ourselves differently. Grandparenthood and what that means in retirement, what your expectation is and what becomes a reality. There's so many incongruities in expectation and reality that there's a lot of disappointed retirees walking around who don't know why they're disappointed. And this clearly shows you why. Thank you. Yeah. And may God bless you and Alex, and thank him. Sorry that he wasn't able to join us, but we bless you for the work you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you for your work too, Eric. Appreciate your time.
God bless you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.